Okay, Rabbi, so let's see what we can do. Okay, let's first deal with one or two questions, and then we'll go into Ashanosan Teres MS and speak about the Shiva Yemei Miluim. You realize we're in the Shiva Yemei Miluim. What are the Shiva Yemei Miluim? The 7 days that are actually the last 7 days of the year. In the last 7 days of the year, it depends how you split the year up. But those that hold that the year begins in Nisan, so that's it. We're in the last 7 days. Significance of these last 7 days was actually already brought down from last week's parasha and the parasha before. Last week's parasha being called Shmini. So, what's the Yesod of Shmini? Shmini is the 8th day. Happened to be, it was the Rosh Chodesh, right? It was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So, Moshe Rabbeinu, he performs the avodah of the Shiva Yemei Miluim for 7 days, the inauguration of the Mishkan, where Moshe Rabbeinu performs the avodah. Aaron is watching what to do and how to do it. He's taking notes, etc. And that happens for 7 days. But Yom HaShmini was on the 8th day, which is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Now Moshe Rabbeinu calls Aaron. Up steps Aaron to become Kohen Gadol and begin the avodah. Oh, something's arrived. Begin the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, so let's discuss some of this, and then we'll get back to your question. Actually, let's deal with the question first. Question, right. How much should you give of yourself in terms of giving to others? At the same time, what about your own growth and your own bettering as a person? Related to the question we had of, can you be involved in something which is a little bit suspect, but with the intention of trying to raise those people? In other words, the atmosphere is not the best, but if you're not there, someone else is going to be there, and then it's going to be even worse. It's a good question. So they are related. Let's just first deal with it. It's obvious, we know that you've got to be Baalei Chesed. We know that. You've got to be Baalei Chesed, you've got to help other people. And as the Nefesh HaChaim writes in his introduction, that Reb Chaim Volozhin always told his son that the Ikki is the person who should know he's not created for himself, he's created L'hoya La'achrina to help and do for others as well. But, this is an important point. You have to know that the better you are, the more you can do for others. Yeah? The more you can do for others. In other words, you could say, let's give an idea like this. There's a bit of a machlokes out there. Some of the opinion that if you've learned Aleph, go teach Aleph. Right? Good point. Once you've learned Aleph, go teach Aleph. However, if you've learned much more than Aleph, you'll have much more to teach. So, what should be your priority? It has to be really that, in other words, how long should you spend filling up your batteries? How long should you spend in yeshiva? Or kollel, or whatever it might be. How long should you spend? And then, when should you teach others? So, the truth is, that question depends on the person. Depends who you are. As we all know, the Stipler told Chaim Kanievsky, his job is to sit and learn. His job is to sit and learn. He wasn't even supposed to go out and teach Torah. That wasn't for him. His job is to sit and learn. Now, it happens to be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged things that, don't worry, he spent many hours giving to others. All the shilas that he answered, hundreds. He was the most, he received the most post in all of Eretz Yisrael. Sounds quite cool, but right? The single address that got the most amount of letters. So he got all these letters, and he answered as many as he could, and he spent many hours doing that. So we know his job was okay. He sat and learned. He was kol Torah kula, but even he spent time giving to others. And as we mentioned, that when somebody asked him about it, don't you feel that it's a bit below you? It's a waste of time. Someone else could answer half these questions. You don't need to ask the Gadol HaDor questions that are asked by not the greatest people. They're just asking you questions just so they can say they got a letter from Chaim, whatever it might be, So he said, so they said, aren't you wasting your time? He said, no. How do you know that I'm losing time with it? Maybe I'm gaining time by answering these questions. Meaning, maybe when you do a chesed for others, not maybe, when you do for others, you're going to gain time, not lose time. You think you're losing time, but maybe I have, and maybe, we don't know the cheshbonos of Hashem, but maybe he had many years added to his life because he spent that time giving to others. So you think you're losing time, and that's what he said. You think I'm losing time, maybe I'm gaining time. And as we know, Rav Preda, right, the famous story of Rav Preda who's taught the Talmud, who didn't get it 400 times. And the Gemara tells us that a Baskal offered him, right, do you want, right, to live a long life or to get the whole generation to go to Olam Haba? and he asked the generation should be taken to Olam Haba, and he got both, right, Olam Haba and a long life. Now, why did he get a long life? To show you that you thought you were wasting your time by again going over the Gemara, and again 400 times. It's like that's to the extreme. So he's wasting his time. But his reward was, got given much more. So the Yesod Advarim is, when you give to other people, you don't lose out. You don't lose out. Even though it looks like you lose out, that's part of gaining. And careful, and even if you think you do lose out, your tachlis is to ultimately give. Who's the example of this? Chasam Sofer used to write this in his introduction, in one of his Sfarim, and he used to say this many times over, bring a raya from Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu could have been on his own, learned Torah, he could have meditated and elevated himself higher and higher levels, and instead, of course he did that, but he was involved with Sodom type people, davening for them, helping them, achnasas orchim. Like, come on, Avraham Avinu, you could be some spiritual giant, and you're busy, making meals for others. What's going to be? But he taught us that no, that a person's tachlis ultimately is your shleimus, your perfection will come from giving to others. Right? However, this is the point. However, that being the case, you've got to build yourself. And the bigger you are, the more you can give. The way Rabbi Yitzchak Berkowitz used to say, when I remember hearing him say like this, was that, an interesting way of describing it. He said, if a guy goes to a chasna, how long do you have to spend? You have to go to the chasna, you have to spend a while there to have your presence felt. Spend the whole evening there. Got to be there, If the Baal of Simcha wants to know you're there, thank you for coming is not just popping in for 5 minutes. You've got to be there. But if you're the God Lador and you pop into 5 minutes, thank you so much for coming. It means so much to me. You came for 5 minutes. Like, it's so. Why? Because the God Lador. So he used to say, and it's worth becoming a bigger person, because the bigger you are, the bigger your mitzvahs then become as well. Your 5 minutes becomes much more powerful, much more meaningful. So the bigger you become, the bigger your impact will be. So therefore, the more you raise yourself up, the more ultimately you're going to be able to give of yourself. So classically, the right hashkafa for a teenager is be selfish. Yeah, careful, it sounds a bit like contradictory. I just spent 10 minutes saying how much you have to be a giver, and here I'm saying being selfish. No, because at this point in your life, you've got to fill up your kli. You've got to fill up your battery. Charge it as much as you can. Of course, the whole of your life, you're always trying to fill up more. But there comes a time in your life where you will be giving out much more. That's a later time. But these years are so critical, very, very critical. Mamash already starting now. You've got to fill yourself up as much as possible. Not just with Torah, I mean, you've got to fill yourself up with midas and working on yourself and becoming the best person you could possibly become. So that's very, very critical. From age, Mamash 13, but let's talk 15 till 25, 30. How long does it last? Yeah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu pushes you out. You see, Chazon Ish could learn for 50 years filling himself up, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew just another year of a Chazon Ish learning and becoming even greater before he gets schlepped out to the world. And even then, of course, when he was schlepped out to the world, he carried on pumping and building and building. But the point just being that there was a time in his life where he literally just dedicated himself day and night, Yom v'Layla, Kol Kulei, in Avodas Hashem. Everything's Avodas Hashem. Just the chelik of your life where you're giving is the second half. Rabbi Kiva, he was 40 years, in Amaretz. 40 years he then learned Torah, and then 40 years he taught Torah. Right? That's how it's brought down. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, the same thing as well. Right? Not that he was in Amaretz for the first 40 years, but he learned for 40 years, and then he taught for 40 years. In other words, the teaching was the later on. But you've got to fill yourself up first. The bigger you are, the better you'll be. The better you be, but you've got an achrayus to be able to give the world the best you. And I'm telling you now, just from a practical point of view, Klal Yisrael needs proper people. Like, we need toichen. To become a quality individual, somebody who's a Talmud Chacham, it needs a lot of effort. It's not click your fingers and overnight you become a Talmud Chacham. It needs a lot of effort, but it's within mind to have that in mind. So now, you want to know, how much should I give to other people? In the bigger picture of things, these are your years more of filling up rather than focusing on giving to others. That doesn't mean you become a selfish person. It just means that's your main focus. Okay? So, within that context, what about giving to others it's always good to give to others in terms of, as long as it doesn't hamper in a major way your avodas Hashem. So there was a story that I read, and afterwards, I read the story that there were two boys in Schneider's yeshiva, which was actually in London, and it was mainly full of a lot of refugees that came over from Europe, talking about in the wartime, and there was a young bacher who came to the yeshiva, and he was not very advanced at all. He didn't know much. In fact, not only did not know much, he didn't know anybody. And the poor guy, I feel a bit bad for him, poor guy, he sits at the front of the Beis HaMedrash, and he sat and started to learn on his own, and he put a notice up outside saying, I'm new in the yeshiva, just arrived, looking for chavrusa for morning seder and afternoon seder and evening seder. If anybody has any time, I'm sitting in the front right, that's my seat. Okay, puts up a sign. And meanwhile, he sits down and learns wherever he can, but it's not so easy to learn on your own, even in the Beis HaMedrash. And it wasn't so easy. So first Seder, okay, he managed whatever he could. Second Seder, he managed. Third Seder. And this carried on for 2 days. By the third day, he said, I can't anymore. It's impossible. I'm on my own. I have no chavrusas. I'm going to give it one. This is the last day. If it doesn't work today, I'm leaving. I can't. So, morning Seder, hoping someone will come. Nobody comes. Afternoon Seder, no. He says to himself, this is it. If nobody comes by the end of night Seder, I'm leaving the yeshiva. It's not for me. I've got to do something else. I can't survive like this. Okay? End of night Seder, nobody comes. Closes the sefer. He's on his way out the Beis HaMedrash. 2 boys came over to him. 2 boys. And they said, we only just came to the yeshiva now. We're late here for the Zman, wherever they only came now. And we just saw your notice. And, I'm happy to learn at least with you for an hour. And he's also happy to learn with you for an hour. And it made this boy's, not just day, change his whole life. Sat down, he had a chavrusa. They realized there was hope. And eventually he got into the yeshiva, got into more, got other chavrusas, and the rest is history. Who are these 2 boys? The 2 boys in the yeshiva who came over to him, they were the best 2 boys in the yeshiva. One was called Moshe Sternbach, and the other one was called Tovia Weiss. Tovia Weiss is the Gaivid of Yerushalayim, and Moshe Sternbach is called the Ravid of Yerushalayim. Okay? They're both 2 of the Gedolei Hador, and this was them. And they were known as the best. I said this once. I said this story in Machzik Hadas. And one of the guys came over to me afterwards, and he said, of course I remember those Bochrim in Yeshiva. Mr. Gittelman is no longer alive. He says, of course I remember the Bochrim. Yeah, of course, from Sternbach and Tovia Weiss. Anyway, the point being, these were the best guys in Yeshiva. They're well known. Everyone knew they were the best guys in Yeshiva, hands down. But they gave an hour of their day to change someone's life. Now, did they lose out? I don't believe they lost out. So you don't lose out by doing a chesed. On the other hand, if it's going to mean that you avoid, that you're going to be completely brought down, that's also not necessarily ideal. You've got to focus on building yourself. So there's a balance. There's a balance in realizing these are your ikka years of filling up your battery. On the other hand, looking out for a fellow yid is always something that is positive. And obviously it's more difficult. Each case has to be judged, question by itself, but the broader picture is, so that's with regards to that. Just 1 second. With regards to putting yourself in an environment that, if you're not there, then it's going to be even worse. If you're there, you're going to elevate the whole thing. I get that as a question. It's a good question, because if you're there, you can really make an impact, and you can make a difference. The question is, number 1, can you really make a difference? Meaning, you'll make a local difference, but are you just feeding something which on the whole is not healthy for them spiritually? And do you say, look, it's not my responsibility, I can't save the whole world, and yes, maybe I'll do that organization, but on the other hand I could do a different organization that's a little bit more kosher. And so it's a difficult question. Generally the answer to that is that one doesn't put oneself in a place that's more precarious. Generally, although specifics can be different depending on the circumstances of the person, how old he is, what's his strength of his Torah, Emunah, etc. How needed is it? It's a subtlety, but generally one avoids it. But it can be used. It can be sometimes applied. Yeah, what were you saying?
I was going to say, but what if people, for example, they can recharge their batteries with it?
Then no shaila. It's not even a question. You should do that. No question. You should get involved and help others and do things for others. No question. If it feeds you, then that's a sure sign. By the way, it depends on the person. Some people, if they'll enjoy it. They're the ones that want to, I don't know, they'll organize or whatever it might be. They'll give it to Torah. They'll be involved. Fantastic. Other guys will be like, panic if they hear that and they, that's too much for them. You got to know yourself. If it feeds you, absolutely go for it. Okay, that was that. Then we get to let me just speak about this for 10 minutes, but Hashem a little bit more, and then we'll have a focus. There's two different. So we mentioned the Shivi Mei Miluim, the 7 days of the Miluim, which we're in now. These are the last 7 days of the year. Technically, the last 7 days of the year, you would have thought actually are the darkest days of the year. It's not true. It's not true, as we'll say in a second. But because Nisan is the beginning of the year, the great nisim of taking us out of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is what's called in the Sfarim HaKadoshim, is Seirusa Dera'ela, an awakening from above, meaning Yetzias Mitzrayim was something we didn't necessarily deserve. We didn't deserve it. It was way above us. What did we do to deserve being taken out of Mitzrayim? A little bit of Purim Pesach, a little bit of Matzah, we listened to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's command, fine, but what level were we on? According to the Medrash, Menta Shari Tumah, we're on the 49th level of Tumah. And yet we were taken out. That, by the way, is the tragedy of the Rasha, that the Rasha says, what's all this avodah for you? Right? What an idiot. He's such a fool. Because the whole point of Yetzias Mitzrayim was not whether you were a tzaddik or not a tzaddik. It's not about your level. All you had to do is sign on the dotted line. I'm in it. I'm part of Klal Yisrael. I'm with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's it. You got taken out. We say, fool. If you would have been there, you wouldn't have been taken out. And you're the one that Dafka would have been good for. Because it's not about your level. We weren't on the highest level. Anyway, so we're on the 49th level of Tumah. Hashem takes us out. It's called Iseirusa Dera'ela, an awakening from above. It's a gift. He turns on all the lights. It's amazing. Now we're the furthest part of the year away from there. Nisan is the beginning. Nisan, Lashon Nisim. We now hit Chodesh Adar, and here it's even Adar Sheni. We're 13 months away from last Nisan, right? So it's the furthest away, and therefore it is reflected in the Purim story. What's the Purim story? Of course, that everything is only natural, so to speak. Naturally, only you don't see the Yad Hashem. The name of Hashem is not mentioned in the Megillah explicitly, and therefore you have to see B'toich HaTeva in nature. Now, we know there's Gemara in Megillah that tells us that Purim is in the second month. Why is Purim in the second month? Anyone know? Soymech Geula. You're going to put one Geula, Purim, next to Geula of Mitzrayim. Why? Because this is Geula and this is Geula. So it's a pair, it's a match. One goes with the other. So the pshat is like this. Pshat is, now that we've said that really this part of the year is the furthest part from those miracles, and the avodah is take the miracles of Nisan and put it into the natural world of Adar and see the Yad Hashem in Purim. But here comes the Yesod Advarim. Here comes the Oimek. The Oimek is, if you do that, if you see the Yad Hashem in the natural world, you'll be Zoicha to a new Nisan on an even higher level. Which means, if you do what you're supposed to in this world, you won't just simply overcome a Nisayan. I had a difficulty, I overcame it. You'll be Zoicha to Siyata D'Shmaya. You'll get a download of Siyata D'Shmaya that is way above the reward for the act that you did. In other words, Purim leads to Pesach. That's why it says Geula to Geula. Because if you do Purim correctly, meaning you understand the message of Purim, that the Hashem is here, in the Nistar, in the hidden, and you do that, and you live your life accordingly, and you battle through the Nisyonos, and you overcome, and you achieve, and you learn, and whatever it might be, and you're growing in Avodas Hashem, then what will happen is, you'll be Zeicha to Siyata D'Shmaya of a Nisan. Purim leads to Pesach. We understand that, okay, Pesach is the beginning of the year, as a gift. Yeah, but if you work hard, you'll get another gift. But this gift will be even bigger. Meaning, the normal understanding is Pesach is a gift, and Purim is hard work. But what we're adding here is, according to your hard work, will be your gift that you'll then get. An even bigger gift, because you work so hard. So, That's what we're saying here. We're saying that in a world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hides, if you live through Purim, then you be Zechet Pesach. So I once a group of boys to the sons of the Rebbe, and we went into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe spoke to the boys, and he said, you should know. It's very funny because Rabbi Shraga Keller spoke to the group of boys the next evening and said exactly the same idea. So both Machabim. Anyway, same boys, yeah. So he said, you should know that in the generation that we live, it's harder to be a more erech boy, a more sincere, genuine Ovid Hashem, because the nisyonos are greater, the challenges are greater. But if you rise to those challenges and you overcome them, you'll be zocher to greater siyata d'shmaya than other generations. In other words, the nisyonos are harder, but the siyata d'shmaya that you get if you put that effort in will be much more than previously. Meaning that vort is Purim to Pesach. If you do Purim, you put in that effort, you'll be zocher to a whole new level, which is even more of a gift than the previous Nisan. And that's the Avodah. This, by the way, is brought out by the Shiva Yemei Meluim, which lead to the Yom HaShmini. What's the vort? The Shiva Yemei Meluim. So now I'm going to say something which sounds the most obvious thing you've ever heard, but I'll then explain it. Yom HaShmini is the 8th day. Number 8 is 7 plus 1. That is what 8 is. 8 is 7 plus 1. 7 plus 1 means you can only get to 8 if you've worked through the 7. The 7 days of the Miluim, Moshe Rabbeinu put the Mishkan, he was doing the Avodah, and he was putting it up, and everything was done. And then again, next day, the 7 days of Moshe Rabbeinu's effort led to then the 8th day. Now we can call to Aaron, and now we can turn the lights on. Now we all know that the Maharal explains to us 7 represents the natural world. 7 days of the week. 7 is the natural world, and 8 is l'malam min hateva. 8 is shemoina, which is that which is like shemen, it goes above. Oisos neshama, it's that which is l'mayla. Bris Milah is on the 8th day. But what we're saying here is an extra little knetch. You have to understand that you can't get to 8 l'malam min hateva unless you've battled through the 7. If you battle through the 7, you've worked through the 7 days that create the week, or the 7 of Olam Hazeh, then you can be zoicha to Olam Haba, which is Keneged the 8th. The Shiva Yemei HaMeluim, the 7 days of Meluim, which is mamash the days we're in right now, the last 7 days of the year, according to the new year being Nisan. So these 7 days, if you build in the 7 days, Adardik, then you be zoicha to day 8, which is exactly what we're saying of Smichas Geula LeGeula. If you go through Purim, Adar, properly, you see the Yad of Hashem in that which is hidden, you battle through the Nisyonos, you manage to overcome, you manage to put in all the effort you can, even in a world of Hester, where Hashem is hiding, Esther, Milosh, and Hester. If you manage to do that, you'll be zoicha to the incredible download of number 8, which is Chodesh Nisan. And therefore the 8th day is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The 7 days is Adar. The 8th day is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That's Smichas Geula LeGeula. The Geula of Purim, if you live that correctly, you'll be Zocher to the 8th, which is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And therefore, that is why you need to have one Geula next to the other Geula, and that's the idea of what's called the Oz. How does the Shira begin? When do we sing Shira? On the 7th day of Yetzias Mitzrayim. 7th day. After we've gone through the 7 days, we then have the incredible revelation of Kriyas Yam Suf, and then what happens? We sing Shira. Shira is Me'al Me'eva. When you burst into song, it's above the natural world. And what happens? We start with the words Oz Yoshe Moshe. Explains the Maharal and the Kli Yakar and others. The Oz is Aleph Zayin. Aleph Zion, it's 1 plus 7 or 7 plus 1. It's where you take the 1, which is the Rebbeinu Shalom, Echad Mi Yodea, and it's now the 7 of this world has been elevated up to connected to the 1. L'mayla min hateva, Oz Yoshim Moshe, Oz, the Aleph of the Zion. That is the Shira, which is the result of the 7 days after Pesach. Then we plug that into the world that's above, and that's the Oz Yumalei Schok Pinu, that's going to be the end of days, which is also connected Adar, that in Oz, then, in those days, everything is going to be elevated. all the 7 is going to be elevated to the 8. And that's our Avodah in Adar to Nisan, Smichas Gul Geula, these 7 days of Yimei Meluim, which lead to the 8th day, which is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So it's mamash bringing all the year together. It's bringing the end of the year to the beginning of the year, and that's your Avodah. Your Avodah is you're living in a world, and my Avodah, or all our Avodah of this generation, is we're living in a world of darkness, of hester, of challenges, of nisyonos, of difficulties. Oh, but we have to know, if you rise to that challenge, if you meet that challenge, then you'll be Zocher to Siyata Dishmaya that's way above. The download that you'll get will be way above. So you guys have all started unbelievably, your mamash, the 7, blasting through the 7, and mamash Be'ez Hashem, should be Zoicha to the 8 as well, Be'ez Hashem. Okay, we'll stop in terms of that at this point.
There's going to be a Rebbe.